Hi, it's Greg from Curry Country Living, and I haven't done a wood boiler stove full, and I was actually able to convince Travis to come down from Stonewall and visit me and take a look at the stove and go over some stuff. So Travis, maybe tell me a little bit about yourself and how you're involved with the stove that I have sitting in my yard.
Yeah, so pretty well. I sold Greg this Portage, Maine 3444. You're going on year 3, right?
This is my third winter, yep.
Yeah, so yeah, pretty well. Greg's learned quite a bit about the stove in the last couple years, and he was trying out a boiler commander.
So right now, what I can tell you about, I've had a wood stove since 1990, so I've had lots of experiences, but this is what I would almost consider a hybrid. Like, this is a fairly efficient wood stove to begin with. So for anyone that doesn't know, maybe go through the qualities of this stove, because I know you have it brick lined. I have the 180 wraparound, some stuff that some of the other stoves don't have. Myself personally, I really like this stove because it's easy to operate. I throw wood in, it doesn't give me too much grief. Things are easy to work on, but maybe go through some of the features on this stove.
Sure, yeah, so pretty well what a lot of people don't realize is that a conventional boiler can be efficient. Like there's that middle ground where you don't need to have perfectly seasoned wood, you don't need to have your wood split. You got an easy to operate boiler without all the maintenance. Like we all notice, like if we follow the forums, that there's a lot of bricks that are breaking on like the nozzles.
Yep.
So, but with this boiler, this is real refractory brick that's made for forging steel. So it can take a beating, log can hit it, it's not going to shatter. And these bricks, I've seen boilers 10 years old, they still look brand new. And
I know I've got some footage I'll insert here about some of that stuff that we're talking about, Trav, but I can attest to the fact that, yeah, you can throw it in. I know it's always a good idea to have a layer of coals or ash in the bottom, but when you're first throwing that stuff in and you hit the sides and stuff, I've had no issues with any of that. This is a shaker model, and apparently that's all they make now. They used to make it without the shaker before, but now you just have the shaker option. Maybe explain what the shaker option is.
Yeah, so the shaker option is a 3/4 inch plate steel, not cast iron. Cast iron gets brittle when it gets hot.
Yeah.
And you can notice that, so this is a 2-piece sectional boiler, fully rebuildable with the top section. There is another boiler on the market that is rebuildable, but it sits right on the ground. Water can pool around the base. It can corrode the base. So this is lifted up off the ground, so you don't need to worry about moisture building up and rotting out the base. So pretty well, if the top ever needs to be switched out on a Portage, Maine, that base is going to be still like brand new.
So right away I'm thinking, okay, switched out. So we're talking 20 years down the road, or
anytime. Like, no manufacturer is perfect. A lot of dealers like to pretend that their product is going to last forever. That's far from the truth. Like, there's defects like that can happen to any product. It's like buying a vehicle.
Yep.
You can get a lemon.
Well, and I like the idea that it's not throwaway. Like, most things today are throwaway, right? From TVs to radios to everything else, when they're broke, you throw it away. I like the idea that in 15 or 20 years, if I spring a leak or if something happens, I can take this apart and replace it with a boiler on top of it. So
yeah, and that's the part too, is that like all the welds in this boiler are double seam welded, so they're welded on the inside and outside. So you get two chances to get a perfect pass.
You get that seal in it.
Yeah, and boilers that don't use, so this is 1/4 inch plate steel, cold rolled. So what ends up happening with that is you got a lot more material to play with, so you can actually dig in hard with that welding and burn a good weld, where the thinner metal that the competition uses is roughly 1/8 inch. So they're single seam welding. Well, if they don't get that first pass right, then that's the
end of it. Yeah.
And you got to look at the welds. The welds on the Portage, Maine are smooth. They're like nice beads that you can put on a showroom floor. Well, look at other boilers and do your own research, because if you see bubble gum, that means that they're burning cold.
So not going to get that seal, or it's going to be weak and it'll start leaking later on. So with this stove, like you say, this is the third season. The first thing that Trav pointed out to me was the water thing there, and I'll maybe point that out right now. I started this stove in late September, early October, not burning heavy, but I have not added water to it at all, so it's probably dropped. I'm guessing a 5-gallon pail would probably bring that back up. But where do you like to see that filler?
Well, pretty well when the boiler's up to temperature, all your buildings are up to temperature, then all the water has expanded to its furthest point.
Right.
And then at that time you would fill it up where it's not quite all the way full, but just up to that full mark.
Yeah. Okay.
Because you don't want to overfill it, then the boiler, like say if it's
expansion.
If you got a really big call for heat, then it might push a little bit of water out if you add too much.
Yep. So right now, I've got what I consider 3444 is one of the models you sell, but maybe start at the bottom end and go up to the top end. How many different models does Portage and Main make?
So there's a 2534, and then there's a 2840. So those two models are going to be the average, like house with a garage.
Yep.
And then there's going to be a 3444, which is what you have, which you're heating all this area. Like you got a pretty good square footage.
So yeah, I basically got the house, which is close to 3,000 square feet, 2,700 square feet, and then I got the barn loft. Like I run a B&B, so we heat the whole loft, and I also have the downstairs, which is close to 80 by 30, 2,400, another 5,000 square feet. So I can say that I'm doing close to 9,000 square feet. This is something that I always, when I'm watching other boilers and stuff, and people have to be careful on this. Like my 8,000 square feet is going to be totally different from somebody who's got a house that was built 20 years ago compared to my house built in 1911. Like the heat demand. So when you start talking square footage, I think people have to realize square footage on what type of buildings, right?
Yeah, and on top of that too, what type of boiler, what type of efficiency, because there's many brands that claim they can heat 9,000 square feet, and but then when you talk to the dealer, they say, well, it can only heat half of that.
Yeah, and this is based on, I think this is generally speaking for all stoves, but based on a 12-hour burn, right? Like that's what you want to get mostly out of your stove is a 12-hour burn. If you get longer, great. But anything shorter than you're scrambling to make it work for a regular work day or something.
Exactly. And a 12-hour burn, typically with the Boiler Commander, they recommend to stuff it right full.
Yeah.
But with stock, because with the Boiler Commander, it prevents overshooting of temperature because your foot isn't on the gas pedal the whole time. The Boiler Commander's putting the fire back down to cruise control.
So that's one of the reasons you're down here is because I got this boiler. We're going to talk about the Boiler Commander now, and that's an add-on to the stove, right? It doesn't come with the stove, but you guys sell the Boiler Commander. Maybe explain a little bit of the history behind the Boiler Commander, and then we can talk about how it pertains to the Portage and Main and then to other wood stoves.
Yeah, so pretty well the Boiler Commander is a third-party add-on. It works for every boiler make, like it's on Heatmasters, Heatmore, Crown Royal, like pretty well every stove you can that has a blower on it.
It's adaptable. It adapts. It's not for a gasification stove. It's for a conventional. It's almost what I would consider turning your conventionals into a hybrid. Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, except without the refractory brick, you won't achieve high enough temperatures to get to that hybrid gasification stage. And on top of that too, with the heat exchanger, what ends up happening is if you don't have a full heat exchanger that can collect water from 360 degrees all the way around four sides, then you just you won't collect that heat either.
So that's the 180 that we were talking about, right? Like that's the 180 degree, like basically the smoke comes out at the back, has to come forward and around there and then back in again. Like it's doing that wraparound.
Yeah. Yeah, and pretty well the blowers on the Portage Main are quite a bit smaller than the competition because they're able to get a hot enough fire so you aren't taking a leaf blower to a campfire trying to get it going.
Yeah. So basically, typically, what is the temperature of the smoke going out a chimney on a Portage-a-Main without the boiler master?
It's roughly like anywhere from 600 to 700
degrees.
Yeah.
And so so with the boiler master, I know I can set mine anywhere from, well, you can set it down to 0 if you wanted, but basically I'm setting it anywhere from 300 to 450 degrees, just depending on what the temperature does. But maybe explain how that works. How that let's actually take the camera and go around to the other side, and we'll talk about that.
Okay.
All right, so this is what I put on last year. This is the Boiler Commander. Maybe go through some of the things on it. And one of the things I'll mention is Trav just mentioned me coming back that he probably thinks that I'm should be upping the temperature a little bit because I got some creosote build up. But that's all to do with the moisture of your wood and where you have this thing set. So anyways, let's go through this Boiler Commander, Trav, and let people know how it works.
So pretty well, depending on the species of wood that you're burning, the moisture, the size of wood that you're burning, all determines what your set point's going to be for your limit. So it's going to try to maintain that 400. So you can see it's maintaining it within 1 Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
Greg had it set at, was it
330?
330, so bumped it up to 400. That should clear everything up. But typically you're going to be anywhere around, recommendation for a Portage-a-Main, 350 to 450 for an average set point. And I believe we're going, Joe is going to get a chart together of all the boilers that he's had them on, and it'll show, because there's a bypass switch there, so you can see what the boiler would normally operate at with its stock form. So then that way people can see how much they're actually reducing the heat going out the chimney.
So that's we talked about this just on the other side, and I said that's typically what I was seeing on this. When I have it on a bypass, I would see anywhere between 650 and 700 degrees on a bypass. You said depending on splits and stuff, that may go higher. I mentioned that I had the door open once and got it up as high as 800, 850, but all that heat's going up the chimney.
Yeah. So yeah, when you got the door open, it's pretty well just a direct path out.
Going out.
And that's where the fan size, so the competition that uses larger fans, they're pushing a lot more heat out the chimney.
So, and I was just going to say that. So if a person knows what kind of heat they're pumping out the chimney, so if they're pumping out 1,000 degrees or 800 degrees, this thing's going to be more efficient.
Yeah. So the Portage-a-Main benefits the least from the Boiler Commander because it's already at a good mechanical efficiency.
Yeah.
So without naming brands, other brands with multi-pass, they're reaching above 1100.
1100 degrees Fahrenheit.
So if they're able to even reduce that down to 600, 700, they're saving a lot larger spread than a Portage-a-Main that's only running at 600 to 700, going down to 400.
So I know I got this thing late last year and wasn't really able to give it a fair trial, and I've had it now all this season. We're into October, November, December. I've got 3.5 months probably. We've had all kinds of weather from extremely cold, minus 35 degrees Celsius, to today's about minus, I guess, 6 or 7. And the way I judged, I've always been saying, 15%, 20%. I've always been judging how efficient this thing is by how long of a burn I can get before my water drops. So,
and that's the main thing with the Boiler Commander. You don't want to let it get to the point where the water's dropping. No, and I know that's you guys have been letting me know that. I know with the full bypass on stove, just regular, minus 35 degree weather, 30 degree weather, I'd get 9-10 hours of burn. Before when I say burn, again, I've got one of those ink birds, the same as what you have, where you can register the temperature of the water. So, and that's one thing when you put a Boiler Commander on, forget the way you used to load it. Yeah. On trying to match 12 hours, and because so without the Boiler Commander, it's recommended to load enough wood to last you 12 hours, but still have like coals left.
Your coal bed.
But with the Boiler Commander, you load it right up, because that pretty well you don't have that chance of boil over, because the Boiler Commander is putting it into cruise control, so you aren't just engulfing the whole firebox into flames. It's a controlled burn.
Yeah.
So that's the whole idea behind it, and that way it's charring all the wood, it's actually drying the wood out, and at the same time, since it's lengthening your cycle time, it's keeping your firebox drier too, because it's getting a longer time where it's above the condensation point.
All right, Trav, so I've had you out here for about an hour now, and we've talked about things, and you've been tweaking me. And I use the word tweaking as in he's been suggesting. So what I've picked up from this is if I'm going to use this thing to its fullest efficiency, I need to keep that firebox full. Don't be thinking about stoking it because it's -10 and I think I can get away with a half stoke. Just keep it full all the time. Let this Boiler Commander do its magic, which is basically, you've mentioned a couple times, and I think it's a good analogy, cruise control. And then keeping my minimum temperature high enough so I don't get any creosote buildup.
That's right. And it's going to be different for everyone.
Right.
So you play around with it. You want to have tan ash on the top, heat exchanger, and you don't want to have any glossy creosote. That's where you're going to find your happy medium.
Yeah. So it's I don't think you would call it a huge learning curve. It's just a whole different mindset to how you operate your stove. So
yeah, because everyone's used to loading what they need for 12 hours, and now, well, this, you get so much more flexibility now.
Yeah.
Because you can load it right full. You don't, say you're running late from a hockey game, you don't need to worry about being home at that exact time thinking, oh, my stove's going to be cold and house is going to be cold.
Well, and I think you mentioned it, and it does happen. I'm not on the farm a whole bunch, but going all over. But every time I walk by, just throw a couple of sticks of wood in, or bring it up to full, and let it do its things. So this may or may not happen, but I know you're at Ag Days next week, and I think I'm up there on Wednesday. But maybe I'll stop in and we'll take a look at, because you'll have a couple of different models up there, I'm guessing.
The plan is to have a couple 3444s and a 2534. So kind of a baby stove and near to the largest.
Yeah, and will you have some Boiler Commanders up there? Or?
Yeah, I'll be bringing one to just show customers.
Yeah.
Like the difference between the new, well, it's an add-on that Joe came up with a push button switch. So then he actually put it so then if your boiler runs out of wood, it'll turn the fan off automatically, so then it's not cooling down the firebox.
And you'd probably cool it down and maybe save that coal bed a little bit too.
Exactly. It's actually called a coal bed protector. If you set it right, it should turn off before you lose all your coals too.
Well, that's and that seems to be the biggest challenge for me anyways, is maintaining that good coal bed. But to be quite honest, like I know I had the gasification. That's a huge thing with the gasification stoves as well, right? You got to keep that coal bed there. You don't want to lose that coal bed.
Yeah.
So don't let your stove, if I'm going to take anything away from this conversation, is don't let your stove go to the point where you lose your coal bed.
Yeah, exactly.
And
keep it stuffed. Like you don't need to just always go and throw wood in it, but when you get it down to a good level where you're not out of wood, you throw more on.
Yep.
And thanks. You can burn it down a couple times for ash removal, but the whole idea is that coal bed takes a couple burn cycles to build.
It does.
So if you lose it, and that's your engine. So if you lose that, then you won't be as efficient until you get that coal bed back.
You're playing catch up.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming down, Trav. I know the weather hasn't been exactly great with the roads and stuff, but I appreciate you coming down and going over some of this stuff, and hope to see you up at Ag Days.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, thanks, Greg.
You bet.